All right. Well, greetings, everybody. Welcome once again to the RecPoker podcast, the YouTube video. I'm your host, Steve Fredland. And as always, we are sponsored by Running Aces Racetrack and Casino. This is episode 116 and a couple of quick announcements as we get in. First one is kind of a big announcement. I'm partnering up with Chris Fox Wallace, who's a World Series of Poker bracelet winner. And we are going to be running what's called a Crazy Like a Fox, how pros think about tournament poker. It's going to be a 10-week training session, 90 minutes every Thursday night from March 21st to May 23rd. So it'll be ending right before the World Series of Poker. And he's just outlined some fantastic content. The 90-minute sessions will basically be 30 minutes or so of just pure content, and then an hour of Q&A and discussion and kind of digging in deeper wherever the participants want to take it. So we're really excited about this thing. It's going to be retailing for $300, but if you're part of the RecPoker Nation, you can use a code FOXRecPoker, and you can get that for half price for $150. And all of the information is going to be available out on RecPokerTraining.com, so you can look out there. Otherwise, feel free to shoot me a note. We'll give you all the information, but it's going to be a fantastic way to learn the game, especially as we go into the World Series of Poker season. And we'll be doing some Facebook and Twitter contests, so engage out there and maybe you'll win that for free. So that's pretty exciting. Also, a reminder, Monday nights we do our free weekly chats at 8 o'clock Central Time. We're starting to really dig into hand ranging. So if that's something you're interested in, registration through RecPokerTraining.com. It's free, but you do need to register, and we're just going to have some great discussions, so join us out there. Other than that, I think the only other thing is just a shout out to the Running Aces players of the week from this last week: Gary Wabi, Chu Chang, Larry Smith, and John Graween. So way to go, guys, on your player of the week lammers. So with that, we've got some rec players that are part of the panel tonight: Stacy Nelson, Derek Smith, Chad McVean, and Rob Washam. And our rotating expert is Matt Hamilton. And Matt is he's a great guy. He's got a great knowledge of the game. I've always considered him, since I've known him the last couple of years, as a rising star in Minnesota poker. He's one of those guys that's super nice to you and then takes all your chips. He's really he's been a friend of the podcast. If you've been following us, he's a trainer at our play and learn sessions. He's been part of the player panels. He's got $220,000 in lifetime earnings, according to the Hendon Mob. And this December and January, he went back-to-back, winning the weekly Sunday afternoon double stacks at Running Aces. He's got a 36K score to his credit. That was the Fall Poker Classic main event, I believe, a couple of years ago. So with that, please welcome Matt Hamilton. Matt, what's going on?
Hey, it's good to be back on the RecPoker podcast. I've enjoyed a couple times contributing, so it's fun to be back.
It's always good to have you. I know you're a humble guy, so you don't like all the big pompous, intro stuff. So I was trying to just pick out a few things for you.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. Now I suppose just real quick, the poker time's a little bit harder with the growing family, right?
Yeah, and I was a little bit nervous about this particular podcast. The girls are bedtime for them, so hopefully they don't make any interruptions.
Oh, that's okay. We're a family friendly podcast, so I think everybody that's listening in is going to understand what the world is like when you got the little ones.
Yeah, appreciate that.
Yeah, so Matt, we asked you to kind of come on board and bring a hand or two that you can walk us through. So if you're willing to share that, that'd be great. And then, as always, the panel is just going to interject questions here and there and try to pick your brain. Part of this is it's always interesting to see how people played hands, but really what we're trying to do is try to understand those underlying principles. So, as you and I have talked about many times, it's not about how do you play pocket fours under the gun. It's what are the principles behind how do you play pocket fours under the gun. So I'll just kind of turn it over and you can lead us through there.
Awesome. So what I wanted to present was some hand histories that are pretty relatable to the fields that we play against, and as recreational players, hopefully can apply to the typical buy-ins. So I have a couple hands from I think it was $350, I think was the price point, Cheap and Deep at Canterbury, that was played, it wasn't too long ago, maybe a month ago or so.
Yeah.
And the two hands actually that were quite interesting, and brought up some interesting discussion amongst some friends of mine, where they took place. I'm actually the hero in these examples. And they took place right away on day 2. So I got through day 1, finishing the day with coming into day 2 with 30 big blinds. And the very first hand of day 2, I'm under the gun 1 with ace king of diamonds. And the blinds at this point is 3,000 big blind. And I have about 90,000, so 30 big blinds. So my standard opening size, pretty much regardless, I like to open to like 2.1, 2.2x big blind. So I opened to 6,300, which would be 2.1 big blinds under the gun 1, and it folded to the cutoff, who was, again, this is the very first hand of the day 2, so hard to have, unless I played with this person before, hard to have any reads or any type of perception of him as of yet. But he was the table chip lead, which is definitely a consideration. And he seemed like kind of like a middle-aged, kind of like an aggressive looking opponent. Hard to, you don't want to assume too much when you sit down at a table, but it is worth noting that when you do sit down, at a day 2 or even going into a day 2, I had looked up all the players' names. So I, try to get a little idea of who I think I might be battling against. Anyway, folded to him in the cutoff, and he 3-bets me to 18,000, which is not that big of a 3-bet to about 6 big blinds, which is almost 3x my open size, and it folded back around to me. And so at this point, there is about 34,000 in the middle. So if you include my 2.1 plus his 6 big blinds, that's 8.1 big blinds plus the blinds and antes, brings the total to about just over 10 big blinds. So I started the hand with 30 big blinds, and I think it's an interesting decision coming. I mean, for me, this hand wasn't. I really want to get to the next hand because I feel like that was more intriguing. But this hand feels like a really clear example of a situation where you just want to get all the chips in the middle pre-flop when it comes back to you. So a few reasons why that is you're out of position against an opponent who's the chip lead at the table, who you might perceive as being aggressive. And in those situations, you don't really want to come along and invest a good chunk of your stack and play. You don't want to just call and see a flop and have to decide what to do when you don't hit an ace or a king or a nut flush draw or something like that. And you put yourself in a tricky spot. So I think pretty clearly the best decision is just to 4-bet him, and starting the hand with 30 big blinds. It's a good question to consider. Is there a sizing I can use other than all in? I don't really want to just risk all my chips on the first hand of day 2. That seems like a pretty silly proposition to bust out of the hand and drive home after I just got here 20 minutes ago. But there's certain situations in poker where you simply just have to go with it. You're not always going to be presented with ace king suited under the gun 1 first hand of day 2s with 30 big blinds and get 3-bet and have to face this decision. That these decisions don't happen that often, honestly, and to this extent. But when these situations do arise, I firmly believe that you just have to kind of go with it, especially when you're against an opponent who you think is going to be putting the pressure on post flop. You're already out of position. If he comes along, if he has like jacks or queens or kings or aces and, busts you and you go home, I think you can go home confident knowing you made the good decision. And I think the decision is, the only sizing you should be using starting the hand with 30 big blinds is just all in. Doesn't really make sense to me to 4-bet to like something like, 14 or 15 big blinds and leave yourself with 14 or 15 and going post flop. So this is one hand that I wanted to present just as like, because I feel like a lot of players, especially, when you're going into day two and you have like your mindset on, okay, I got to get through. So just for context, 750 players entered the tournament, about 120 made it to day two, 75 were paid. So we're not in the money yet. And, you always want to go into a day two with the hope of making money. And, it sucks to bubble or close to bubble, and drive home with nothing after having your eyes set on a day two. But I just wanted to illustrate that there are certain situations where you just simply have to not be afraid to go with it, put all your chips on the line. You have plenty of fold equity with 30 big blinds. So if he's just kind of messing around, or even if he has a hand like nines, tens, jacks, even queens sometimes, you put a lot of pressure on those hands that might want to 3-bet you, but then when you 4-bet all in for that amount of chips, you put a lot of pressure on, and you'd like to see him fold those types of hands, honestly, when you're shoving with ace king. And so I thought that was a really, a pretty cool example to use. It's a pretty simple hand to use, but I think it illustrates a couple key points, including, just this idea that you should know that there's certain situations where you just got to put all your chips on the line. Stack preservation is a good thing to keep in mind. You want to be able to make the money. You want to have ICM in mind. But certain situations just really implore you to go with them. And I think this is one of those.
So what do you see, what would be the mistake that you see rec players making? I don't think very many rec players would fold ace king suited in that spot. But do you think the bigger mistake would be the just call situation?
Yeah, I think the biggest mistake probably in that situation is to just call. I think, maybe you might, it's a very first hand of day two. You don't know this player. You're a little gun shy. You have a good hand, but you don't want to go home yet. So I got 3-bet. I'm going to just call, see a flop. I started the hand with 30 bigs. That's still a good amount of chips. He's only 3-betting me to 6 big blinds. If I have to get away from the hand, I still have, 23, 24 blinds left. It's not the worst thing in the world. And it isn't, but at the same time, this is a really good spot for you to accumulate a lot more chips potentially, and to just move on to the next hand. So I think the biggest mistake would be to just call.
It seems like there's a few other reasons too. Part of it is, you want your under the gun early position raises to be respected too. So if you can get a fold, it sort of sets you up for the day two as, hey, don't be 3-betting me light here. Yep. There's that sort of piece. I think there's also, out of position, it's so hard to extract value. If you do just call, hit an ace or a king, if he's on queens or jacks or tens or whatever, it's just so hard to extract value out of position. So at least this way, if you hit, then you get all 5 cards to see if you hit. If you do get called, at least you have max value from your big hand, right?
Yeah, and ace king is a hand that plays best when you see all 5 cards. So the only way you can guarantee that is, in this situation, is going all in pre-flop. If he calls, you're going to see all 5 cards. Hopefully you improve and win. Or he has a hand like ace queen suited and decided to come along with you and hold.
Rob, did you have something?
Well, I was just going to say, when he 3-bets you and you look at the pot size at 33-8, you've got, at that moment in time, you've got a little over a 2-to-1 pot ratio, right? Or stack to pot ratio, which means you're going to end up getting it all in one way or another anyway. So you might as well do it right up front, right? At least at that point in time, you still have fold equity.
Yeah, you definitely, I think, having fold equity is a really key point there pre-flop. I wouldn't necessarily say with your stack to pot ratio that you're going to always be getting it in post-flop, especially if you just call pre-flop. The pot does become pretty bloated, but if I open to 6,300, he 3-bets me at 18K, I call and the flop comes like 9-5 deuce rainbow, I checks and he bets big, I'm in a really tough spot. I don't know that I'll necessarily come along and put my tournament life on the line with just ace high, So I think to avoid some of those tough decisions post flop, and to just put the pressure back on him, because that's a key point too. Fold equity is a big thing in poker, and pressure is a big thing. Aggression is a huge thing, and the opportunities that you can take to put your opponent to the test instead of you being to the test is a really key thing to look for. And this is a situation where you can do exactly that.
Yeah. Hey, Chad, did you have something there?
Well, I was just thinking it helps that you started off with a great hand, but the fact that he had such a big stack lead over you, that he had triple the amount of chips, and maybe he, by his 3-bet there to start, could that perceive that he's got a wider range of cards, that he's just splashing around trying to steal it, and therefore, by you putting him to the test by just jamming, like you find out, yes, no, he doesn't have it, because if he's going to start doing that, he probably has a solid hand maybe 25% of the time if he's got that much of a chip lead over you in trying to steal the pot.
I mean, I think it's it's definitely worth noting that he is the chip leader at the table. It's hard to really read into what his tendencies are, since this is the first hand of day 2, unless you have history with him. But just knowing that he has the chip lead, and just knowing that we're approaching the bubble, if he's a competent opponent, he's going to have a decent 3-betting range in his position. The other thing worth noting is he's in the cutoff in this example, so you should be opening up his 3-betting range a little bit, versus if he was sitting right next to you under the gun too, he's going to have a much tighter he should have a much tighter 3-betting range when he's right next to you and he's not closer to the button and has a better position. So yeah, I mean, I think a couple of key things with that is, in general, the bigger your chip stack, or the bigger your opponent's chip stack is, and the better position he's in, the wider you should allow him to have a 3-betting range. The smaller his chip stack and the worse position he's in, you should kind of confine his range a little bit more.
Good. How about you, Derek?
Yeah, I just had two quick questions on sizing. One, just a general question. Matt, you'd said 2.1 to 2.2 is the first question. Is that irregardless of whether the antes have kicked in? And then the second question was just his 3-bet size. Is there a size tell to you, like had he gone to something more like 21 to 22, 23 in that sort of range? At that point, do you start to wonder if it's more of a value 3-bet from him than maybe just kind of splashing around and using position and the chip advantage over you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. First, I would say generally pre-antes versus post-antes. Pre-antes, I like to use like opening up to 3 big blinds, probably my general, sometimes even more. It really depends on the table. So some tables have a lot of limpers, so my opens pre-antes end up being like 5, 6, 7 big blinds. But post-antes, if I have a reasonable chip stack, I like to open small, 2.1 to 2.3 typically. And in regards to your question about his 3-bet sizing, I didn't read in too much to it. It seemed like a pretty standard or pretty normal like 3-bet size that I would see. And given that this is the first hand and the first time I've seen him 3-bet, I'm not going to read too much into what his sizing might mean. Okay. I think it can vary for opponent. I think good opponents use a pretty standard 3-bet sizing regardless of their holding. But I think some players, there's room to exploit players that do vary their 3-bet size. Like some players will they'll look down at 2 aces and see a raise in front of them, and they'll just like min click you or something because they want you
10-5, right?
And the smaller 3-bet sizing sometimes can make give me more alarm. Okay. And sometimes really large 3-bets just kind of seem really transparent to me, like it's like ace king and he's just looking to win the pot now and not play post flop. But that depends on the opponent. I mean, I think on its face, I wouldn't say that this smaller or larger 3-bet sizing means a certain thing, but I do think some opponents you can glean that information from and make notes on and exploit their tendencies if they do vary their sizings.
Okay. And at a minimum, too, I suppose you're sort of establishing a baseline for his sizing. I mean, you've got one now in the books where you opened and he 3-bet, so.
Yeah, for sure.
Stacy?
Yeah, Matt, I was just wondering about the other factors. You said in this situation, the all-in would be the appropriate move. What do you think? What factors would change to make it a call? Of all the things, stack sizes, places in the tournament. You've kind of touched on a couple of them, maybe position and the aggressive player or that type of thing. Any others come to your mind that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think just on its face, this hand is a pretty clear example of a spot you just want to get it in. And probably it's going to take a lot to change your mind on that. The considerations that could lead you into making a different decision would be if you have, like, let's say, for example, this guy, like you have a long history with this guy and he never 3-bets light and he knows you and he knows you're a good player, whatever. And you just know he's not messing around. Like sometimes you have those really good inclinations, and that might be a spot where you can deviate from this strategy and just call and try to improve. And then also, like if he's a guy like sitting right next to you and you just got like a similar feeling of like he just has a super super tight range here, he's never folding if I shove, he has like queens plus or whatever, I mean, I wouldn't absolutely hate the decision to just call, especially as king suited. And I think you could get away with arguing to deviate from that. I think even with all that said, 30 big blinds, it's certainly not a mistake to just get it in. But I think your specific opponent, and if he's a shorter stack too, like if he started the hand with like, if you think he's looking to go into day two and make the money along with you, and he's got some kind of medium stack, that could be a good indication that when he 3-bets, he's probably not doing it lights, and he's probably not messing around. Especially compared to a guy who comes in as the table chip lead and someone you think might splash around a little bit more.
How close to the bubble before you'd tighten up instead of coming over the top of them?
I think that with this specific example, I don't think it would matter to me. I think if we were on the stone bubble, it's still a spot I'm gonna be just shoving. And I think it's a good question, but I think with this good of a hand, especially like as you get closer to the bubble, that should open up the table chip leaders 3-betting range even more. So that should give you more incentive to just be like, okay, I'm going to go with this. It sucks to like really put yourself to the test and put yourself in that spot. If you keep, fold and just keep folding, you're going to be able to make it in the money, but you're just sacrificing so much equity and so much potential to run really deep in this thing if you don't take that spot, even on the stone bubble.
Does your chip stack change if you're the largest chip stack by a margin and he's like number 2 at the table?
Are you asking like, would I?
Does it change your decision if you're the largest chip stack and he's number 2 and he's doing this and he's 3-betting you? You'll shove on him into the number 2 chip stack?
Well, I think it depends on what stack sizes we're at. Okay. So if he's sitting on, if we're both really deep stack, then my 4-bet size is not going to be all in. It's probably still going to be a 4-bet, but if I'm sitting on 90 big blinds and he's got 80 big blinds, and he 3-bets me, I'm not going all in. I'm going to choose a 4-bet sizing that can put some pressure on him, but also is going to end up taking his post flop if he decides to come along.
Okay, that's helpful.
All right, you want to go into hand number 2, Matt?
Yeah. So this is really the reason I kind of wanted to get into this is because it was the very next hand that I played, and it was against the very same opponent. which made it a little intriguing. And as it happens, I didn't have the exact hand, but I had ace king offsuit in this hand.
Tough game, huh, Matt?
Yeah. So and I almost giggled a little bit when I picked up ace king again. So I'm under the gun this time because I was under the gun one last hand, and I opened up again to 6,300. So same sizing.
So now you got about 35 bigs or so, somewhere there, 36 bigs.
39 because I picked up 6 big blinds
Right.
from his 3-bet and blinds and antes. So started the hand with about 39 bigs. Still same tournament, same 120 remain, 75 paid. Opening up with ace king, ace of diamonds, king of clubs to 6,300. Folds to our friend who is now in the hijack, and he's got about 84 big blinds. He had about 90 big blinds to start the last hand.
Jeez.
So he ended up just to complete the hand from before. I shoved on him and he folded. So we picked up his 3-bet and we picked up the blinds and antes, which brings us to this next hand. And I open it up, folds to him, and he, just to make this more comical, 3-bets me again to the exact same size of 18,000. And it again folds back to me. And I got a little stuck because I was just so humored by the situation, the fact that this is happening. I have the same hand, relatively speaking. He does the same thing, folds back. And, it's just like deja vu the very next hand, which happens very rarely in poker. And so anyway, what I decided to do and what I think are correct are two different things with this hand. So what I decided to do in this situation was call. And so he 3-bet me to 18,000. I decided to call with ace king offsuit. And in my mind at the time, the reasons I decided to call included the fact that I had 39 big blinds, which is a pretty good stack size, and didn't necessarily want to risk all my chips. And I had just 4-bet shoved on this guy, so he might be 3-betting me a little bit tighter because he knows I'm capable of shoving on him, so that might tighten up his 3-bet range. And he's probably not just going to keep messing around with me, given that we just played a hand where I 4-bet shoved on him. So those are a couple of considerations I had in mind.
Does it? I'm sorry to interrupt you. Does the position? I know generally earlier position things tighten up a little bit. So does that make a big difference in this case? It's only one hand later, but now you're under the gun. He's hijack instead of cut off. Is that sort of going through your mind that everything's a little bit tighter on both sides as well?
Yes. I think that's also a consideration that to keep in mind is that since I'm in worse position under the gun, it should be my tightest range, and him being in the hijack, kind of like a middle position, should tighten up his 3-betting range as well. So all those considerations kind of lean me towards just calling, and it's almost like I almost get the sense that I'm kind of trapping by just
you're
calling
underrepresenting.
well.
Yeah, for sure.
So anyway, I decided to call, and so that brings the pot to about 45,000. And flop comes 10-5 deuce rainbow. Not rainbow. 10-5 deuce, 10 of diamonds, 5 of diamonds, 2 of hearts. I have the ace of diamonds in my hand, which is helpful, but obviously this is not a great flop, not one that we're really looking for. Anyway, I check. He bets 13-5 into 45-5, so roughly about a third of the pot, a little under a third. And with my stack depth and the fact that I have backdoor nut flush draw as well as 2 over this board, I think it's a pretty clear spot where we check call one street. So I decided to check call. Brings the pot to 72,000. Turn was the 7 of clubs. I checked. He bet 32,000. And at this point, I think it's a spot where we just have to fold, move on with our day. And at the end of those 2 hands, we ended up just like basically breaking even from those 2 situations. But looking back on, I thought about this hand a lot and had some discussions with some friends, and we didn't completely agree with each other, but my personal opinion, if I had this hand back, this is a spot where I would again 4-bet shove pre-flop. It would just be the same. It would just comically be the same exact scenario as hand number one. The major difference being I start the hand with 39 big blinds, so it's a little bit more significant of a 4-bet jam, but I still think that it's the correct play, even though the considerations in mind that he should have a tighter range because I just 4-bet shoved on him. He's in a worse position. And my opening range should be slightly tighter because I'm under the gun. Even with all those things in mind, I still feel like 4-bet shoving is the correct play. And I think for one big reason to me is that, like, in these huge field, small-ish buy-in tournaments, they're pretty top heavy, and it's really valuable to approach like the money bubble or deep into the money with a big stack, because you can really leverage that to your advantage. So to put yourself in a spot where you're still putting pressure on your opponent, you have tons of fold equity, even more than the last hand. And if you get called, ace king plays well over 5 cards. You hope to get lucky. If he has aces or kings, tough luck, but that's significantly less likely being that you have ace king. So I think it's a spot where, like, I kind of froze up in the moment because of the whole dynamic of what just happened. I think if the first hand never happened and I have 30 big blinds going into this hand, I'm just getting my chips in, no questions asked, similar to how I approached that first hand. But since the first hand just happened and it kind of like was fresh in my mind, and this was just so interesting of a dynamic, it kind of like made me pull back on the reins a little bit and slow down and just take it post flop. But I really think because he was still the chip lead even after that first hand, and very capable of barreling flops and turns and putting pressure on my hand when I don't connect. I think it's a little better to call, like, ace king suited here is a little bit better than ace king offsuit in my mind to call, because you have more playability post flop with a suited hand. You're more incentivized to keep seeing turns and rivers, and you have a little bit more like room to check raise and stuff like that with flush draw potentials. But I think with just ace king offsuit, a hand that really plays poorly if you don't connect on the flop and you get put a lot of pressure on. You don't have a lot of room to work in like check raise bluffs with that particular hand. I think it's a spot where we just kind of like shrug our shoulders and be like, okay, I guess we're doing this again. Yeah, here we go, buckle up, and just hope for the best. And in my mind, it's another one of those spots where I think it's a trickier spot given everything that just happened, and given we have a larger chip stack. 40 big blinds is not a fun amount of chips to just stuff all in the middle of pre-flop. But I honestly think it's the correct play in this situation.
Rob, what do you have for us?
Well, a couple things. First question, the players behind him, the players in the cutoff, the button, small blind, big blind, what kind of chip stacks did they have? What kind of players were they? Were they just rec players? He figured he could get through them easy enough. And then the second thing is he sees a young kid like you coming into the first 2 hands, and right away you bet, and he could be just thinking that you're just messing around right now. And that could make his range a little wider than it normally would be. So those are the 2, things I was thinking about.
Yeah, for sure. I do feel like, so that's one of the big reasons that like your 3-betting range should get tighter the worse position you are, is because of the number of opponents behind. And in this particular case, like he was the chip lead. I came into day two as like a little below average chip stack. I think everyone else at my table was probably somewhere within the vicinity of like 20 to 40 big blinds. So a lot of like medium to smallish stacks. And I think there was another big stack to my right, but not behind him. So yeah, I think like you make a really good point about like how he perceives me. Like, oh yeah, I'm this crazy aggressive kid who just comes in all guns a-blazing, just 4-bet shoved on me. And maybe that I'm not going to put too much weight in that because it's only the second hand of the day. And I really don't know how he perceives me, but that's a good point. You kind of want to have a really good idea of what you think or how you think your opponent perceives you, because you can structure their range. That can help structure their range for you. So yeah, I mean, I think he's probably not too worried about stacks behind because of their stack sizes. Like, it's one of those spots where when he decides to 3-bet, it's gonna, I don't think anyone behind him is gonna look to mess around. And I think that's true for a lot of these types of tournaments and a lot of these types of situations. Like, unless you have like, really good opponents with really big stacks behind you, behind the 3-better, I don't think that's going to play huge factors into the 3-better's decision on whether or not to 3-bet you. Because usually, like, when someone decides to 3-bet, it's like they're kind of laying down the hammer, and everyone else behind them is like, okay, let me get out of the way. I'm going to let these guys tussle around, especially when you're approaching like the money bubble or something like that. But one thing that might change is, like I said, if there's a huge stack behind him who's a aggressive guy and knows how to leverage his stack, that should tighten up this guy's 3-betting range slightly.
Mm-hmm. Chad?
Yeah, I was wondering with the flop, like you completely missed it, but with his range on the 3-bet, he probably completely missed it as well. And the way it rolled out, even though you did miss it, you would have backdoor flush and straight draws. Did it cross your mind at all to re-raise him on his bet on the flop, like the check raise there?
I think it's an interesting question. I think it would be a little tough to know what I'm representing if I decide to check raise the flop. And I also think, like, when he 3-bets me, there's a decent amount of hands that he's 3-betting with that have missed this flop. But there's still a lot of hands that he's comfortable continuing with, and he's comfortable getting the chips. And he has all the higher pairs, jacks, queens, kings, aces, tens, even the flop top set. He might have ace-10 suited in this spot. So, and another reason for check calling is like, okay, he could also perceive me as having tens and jacks and potentially even queens here sometimes, nines, eights, hands that are check calling, that then if he missed the flop and he still missed the turn, he might shut down some of those hands that also missed. And if flop goes check, bet, call, turn goes check, check, I'm a little bit more confident in my ace king high at this point, and we can navigate the river. So I think for me, deciding to check raise the flop is pretty interesting. I think what I'm saying at that point, I guess, is that I have like jacks or queens, which to me, would I just 4-bet those pre-flop if I'm going to be doing this on the flop? So he might he might look at that and be a little confused. And I don't quite know what I'm representing by check raising the flop. Because I think if I had, certainly if I had queens plus, I'm just getting it in pre-flop. Maybe specifically if I had jacks. But even jacks in this spot, probably as played, if I decided to just call his 3-bet pre, I'm probably just check calling this flop as well. Some people play that a little bit differently, but if I think he has queens, kings, and aces in his range a good amount of the time here, I'm still not loving jacks on this flop. And if I have tens and flop top set, I'm certainly check calling because I'm looking to, trap with this strong of a hand and look to check raise later streets. So yeah, I mean, I think it's good to consider a check raise on this flop. Certainly if it was like a monotone flop of like, say if it was 10-5 deuce, all diamonds, and I'm sitting here with the ace of diamonds, I think it's a great spot to check raise.
Hold on. Let's back up the train a little bit there.
All right.
Okay, so you have a backdoor flush draw. You're saying not a great spot to check raise. You don't have the backdoor flush draw. Now you're saying that is a better spot to check raise.
Well, so what I'm saying is if I have the ace of diamonds and the flop was all diamond flop.
Oh, all diamonds. Okay, I thought you were saying rainbow. Okay.
No.
I misunderstood that. Okay, that makes more sense. Okay. I thought maybe it's one of those situations where, I have less equity, so I don't mind losing. I don't mind getting raised off of that hand or something. Okay.
Oh, sure, yeah.
That makes more sense. Yeah. Any other questions, Derek?
I did have two quick ones again. I think one, is there any 4-bet pre, knowing that after you're open for 2 bigs, you're at 37. I think he 3-bet to 6, so you're ripping 37 bigs in. Is there room for a smallish 4-bet there, knowing his 3-bet was not huge? And then any value in that at this point we kind of read into that we potentially are still winning after the flop, or we're still ahead, a donk bet there maybe, and just kind of see how he reacts to something like that, control the size of the pot and just take the lead?
So I think I'll answer your second question first. My personal strategy really, especially after I'm 3-bet in a 3-bet pot, I don't donk lead any of my hands in the spot. Some players do. It's a little weird in my mind to have a good leading strategy in 3-bet pots, so I just avoid it altogether. And I think most seasoned really good players have a similar strategy to me in that sense. Like I don't really like. I guess if you have a hand like, I think the hands that I see players do this on, if they have jacks here,
that's what I thought. Jacks, is that
they decide to lead the flop, which in my mind, like the reason I avoid this strategy altogether is because if I'm the 3-better, oftentimes it's the leading strategy is pretty transparent to me. It's pretty easy to pick and narrow my opponent's range if he's just leading into me after calling my 3-bet. Whereas checking, you're still, obviously completely disguising your hand. And so I just avoid that strategy altogether. And as per your other question about, is there a potential 4-bet size that's not all in? I think that's a fantastic question. And it's a really good question to consider. In my mind, with this particular hand, it makes the most sense just to get all the chips in. If I decide to 4-bet and if I decide to 4-bet, what's a good 4-bet size? Like if we're incredibly deep stacked here, let's say we're both 100 big blinds plus, and I decide to 4-bet, I'm not going to 4-bet shove. What's a good 4-bet size? I think, even then it gets pretty dicey. Like if the 3-bet is to 18,000, a reasonable 4-bet size is going to be like, anywhere between like
16 bigs maybe,
like 48 to like 66,000, which gets like you're basically advertising that you're getting the chips in regardless. So if you 4-bet to you start the hand with 40 bigs, which is 120K. if you decide to 4-bet to, let's use kind of like a small 3-bet sizing even, and use like 42,000, you've invested almost a third of your chips in to a 4-bet pre-flop. What's your strategy going to be post-flop? And so in my mind, a hand like ace king offsuit, you want to put as much pressure on as possible, because you really don't want to see him call your 4-bet and have the 10-5 deuce flop. And what am I doing now? I've invested a third of my chips in. Do I just rip the flop and hope he folds, his pairs or whatever? I don't know. Like if he has 8s or 9s or jacks here, and I 4-bet and he calls pre, and I make this play on the flop, he can call those hands. Whereas if I 4-bet shove against 8s, 9s, and jacks pre-flop, it puts a lot of pressure on him. Yeah. And he's, I think he's folding those out a decent amount of the time. So I think, as scary as it sounds to 4-bet all of those big blinds in, I think the sizing to use is just all in, because I think you're investing, just too much of your chips to use a sizing other than that. I think the only, I think a deviation to that would be like, if you think your opponent is over folding to, if he folds too much to additional pressure, or if you want to string him along, if you have 2 aces here, I think there's certain things that you can consider varying that strategy. So let's say you have 2 aces and you think shoving is going to get him to fold almost everything. I think you can 4-bet to a size that incentivizes him to come along, and then you're just shoving flops, or looking to get your chips in post flop in a manner that makes the most sense to you. I think that's a deviation you can use. The problem with that is, I think when you decide to 4-bet small like that, your opponent is gonna think you have aces or something super strong.
It looks fishy.
So which is in my mind, kind of. If I was going to use 2 different 4-bet sizings in this particular example, I might use a hand like aces as well as a hand like ace-5 suited or something like that, to balance out, to make me not just have aces. Give me another hand in there that I can 4-bet with as a bluff, to represent aces, and block him having aces and ace king and stuff like that. But I think it's a little tricky to have that strategy, and I think the simpler and probably best way is just to, with a stack size like that, just 4-bet all in against the guy that still has the table chip lead against you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you.
All right, well, we're almost out of time, Matt. I had one question on that really quick. Just sort of thinking about the dynamic of the back-to-back hands.
Yeah.
In those situations. I mean, if you 4-bet shove with ace king there, does it go through your mind, or should it be going through your mind that he might call me wider than he would have otherwise if the prior hand hadn't happened? Like if he 3-bet me with ace queen or ace jack or ace 10 suited, maybe he's going to call because he's now seen this back to back, and I might get more value that way. Or is that part of the consideration at all?
Yeah, I think it is part of the consideration. However, the other considerations are countering that, in that you're in a worse position, he's in a worse position, you have a bigger chip stack, so there's other factors that are kind of
need to be weighted a little more heavily.
Different notions. So I think it's while at the same time, and it all kind of maybe comes back to how he's perceiving me, which is all really tough to say, given it's the
Right.
second hand of day 2. You're just kind of just feeling each other out and getting to which is makes this whole thing just so comical to me. The very first 2 hands of day 2,
Right.
the
the exact same bet sizing, same 2 people. Yeah.
Which was really, it's just humorous to me. But I think the biggest points, or the biggest point coming out of both of these hands is you got to pick situations where you're going to be okay getting all your chips in the middle, playing for big amount of chips, not being afraid to put the pedal to the metal, not being afraid to not make the money. If you're presented a situation that might reap you a big chip stack and the ability to run really deep in a big field.
Well, I think those are some pretty good final words. Unless you have anything else, Matt, we got to wrap up. Anything else you want to share at the end here?
No, I think this was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, well, thanks to you. Thanks to Derek and Stacy and Chad and Rob for being here. Thanks to Running Aces for being our sponsor, as always. Make sure you go to recpokertraining.com. Check out all the information out there. Sign up for the newsletter, folks. If you're not on that, sign up. That's how you're going to get the discount codes for the Fox, Crazy Like a Fox program and everything else that we have going on. So go check that out. We'd love to hear from you as well. So until next week, good luck on the felt.